Are you taking the ACT soon and wondering how you can cram in all the knowledge possible so that you're ready for the ACT science section? If so, in this video, I'm going to do a little cram session for the ACT science section. If you're wondering who I am, my name is Brooke. I've scored perfectly overall on an official administration of the ACT. I've also coached students to perfect scores in every section of the exam, including the science section. So I'm going to share some of my knowledge with you guys in this video. I'm not going to be able to fit everything in this video, so if you're looking for more, definitely check out the best ACT prep course ever. That's available at SupertutorTV.com. It's a complete video-based prep course for the ACT. We also have 2 books that are available, the best ACT math books ever. You can get those at Amazon.com, so be sure to check those out as well. And subscribe to our mailing list, totally free, SupertutorTV.com/subscribe. We'll keep you posted on any deals we might have and on the latest videos that we have coming out on our channel. You can also find us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter. So follow us everywhere and we'll keep you in the loop. So as some of you might know, the science section on the ACT is mostly a test of process. And what I mean by that is most of the time you're not required to know a ton of outside information in order to get the questions right. But there's one kind of question on the ACT science section that appears on almost every test at least once or 3 times sometimes, which is the outside information question. And for outside information questions, you will have to know a little bit of outside information, some basic science terminology, things like that, in order to get them right. So that's the type of question that I'm going to be focusing on in this particular cram video. We have other general tips for the ACT science section if you're looking for just some quick pointers on how to approach it. I would recommend that you check out our other ACT science videos if you haven't already, which we'll put some thumbnails up. You can go search for those if you like. But if you want to talk about outside information questions, they can really be, flummoxing questions for a lot of students out there because you can get all of your techniques down and then you're still not getting these right. So we're going to do a quick content cram in this video. I can't predict what outside information you're going to need to know for your ACT tomorrow or whatever day that your ACT falls on, but I'm going to do my best to try to tell you all the kinds of information that have been on past exams, as well as a few pieces of information that we think fit the same profile as those pieces of information that have been tested on. The first section that I'm going to talk about is environmental science, ecology, and geology. Occasionally we have some basic terms that come up in this particular area of science, and a lot of students have never taken ecology or an environmental science. Atmosphere and gases, you want to understand that there's several layers of the atmosphere. The troposphere, which is the lowest layer, the stratosphere, which contains the ozone layer, the mesosphere, which is the coldest layer, the thermosphere, which can heat up to very high temperatures, and the exosphere, which is the highest layer. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers or so of the atmosphere that you should know exist. Some other things that you probably should know, you should know that the ozone layer absorbs most of the UV radiation coming from the sun and converts it into heat. Ozone is like bad when it's harmful to our health and when it's down here on the ground or we have to breathe it, but it's actually helpful when it's in the stratosphere because it helps absorb UV radiation, so it helps protect us from being like totally fried by the sun, and it helps mitigate the effects of global warming and things like that. But we as human beings are destroying the ozone layers. So that's like a fun fact that you should know about the environment and environmentalism. You should know that like human beings and our products that we use have been destroying the ozone layer and that that's bad. And the idea that there is a hole in the ozone layer is something that has been tested as an additional information question. So if you're not really familiar with the ozone layer and how that works, it's something that you might just look up or Google or learn a little bit more about. Greenhouse gases are gases like carbon dioxide, which trap infrared radiation and increase Earth's temperature. Acid rain, that's something that's made harmfully acidic, and it's a byproduct of air pollution. And global warming, you should know the basic definition of global warming, which is basically that Earth's temperature is rising, and pollution leads to this, carbon dioxide leads to this. Let's talk astronomy. On a recent ACT, students had to know the order of the planets to get one of the questions right. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. My very excellent mother just served us nuggets. There's a way you could remember it. There might be others, I'm sure you have more. If you have more, feel free to post them in the comments below this video. We have terrestrial planets or rocky planets or Mercury, Venus, and Earth. There's never been a question that I know of where you had to know that, but you have had to know the gas giants, which are Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. So my guess is if they're going to ask another planet question, they might ask this one instead of this one. You see what I'm saying? Who knows? So good things to quickly try to memorize. Shove as much as you can in your brain the night before, right? Pluto is not a planet. So if your parents tell you it's a planet, ignore them. They have old information. Pluto's a dwarf planet now, and that's that. Star. Oh, this is crazy. So another crazy outside information piece that's really good to know is the sun is also a star. So sometimes you will have these crazy astronomy passages and they will talk about the sun as a star of a solar system, or that solar system star. That's the same as saying that solar system sun. And I've seen a lot of students get super confused because they don't realize that the sun is a star. So good fun fact to know. Meteoroid, comet, black hole, dark matter, just some quick definitions. If you feel like pausing this video and reading through those, please be my guest. But we have no idea if these are going to come up as outside information. What I'm doing is I'm grabbing like the most common terms from sort of every little tiny piece of science, because that's usually what constitutes an outside information question on the ACT. So if you want, you can freeze this video for a second, read over these terms, memorize them, moving on. Ecology, let's talk about ecology. Consumers. So this idea of primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, this is about like the food chain, right? And like who eats what. So primary consumers consume autotrophs. Autotrophs means animals that make their own food. Remember, auto is a root that means self. So autotrophs make their own food. That's like plants and things like that. So mice and grasshoppers, they eat like grass, plants, stuff like that. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers, right? So small birds and snakes are then eating mice and grasshoppers. Then we have tertiary consumers, and we eat bigger, consumers. So wolves and mountain lions. Consumers are organisms which have to consume other organisms in order to get food. So it's not just like a carnivore, herbivore kind of breakdown. Those are just a little bit of vocabulary that you should be familiar with. Geology. I'm not going to go through this geology stuff. A lot of it hasn't come up very often, but here's some like quick terms in geology. If you want to pause this video, you can. This is just some stuff. Weathering. This has shown up on an ACT as an outside information question. So my guess is like the words that have already come up probably won't come up again, but something kind of similar to them will. Weathering is the idea that things are broken down by weather, which seems really simple and straightforward. A lot of times too, on these outside information questions, they're logical in some way. So even if you don't know exactly what the answer is supposed to be, you can kind of figure it out if you use common sense. But just some vocabulary, some basic vocabulary. Erosion, water and wind wear down rocks. Magma is like lava. It's molten rock, but it's below the surface of Earth, whereas lava is above the surface of Earth. Fault, a crack in the crust. You guys should know that. Igneous rock, sedimentary rock, metamorphic rock. This is like from middle school rock class. Probably. So you can read through those if you want to. Now let's talk general information. Now these terms, of all the things that I'm going to go over in this video, I actually think this is the most important segment, because I'm going to talk about scientific method and process. And these terms come up pretty often because anytime you have an experiment on the ACT, these could come up. I'm going to give you a sample experiment first so that this is my reference point so I can explain what each of these other words mean. So here, let's pretend Jamie has 5 different pots labeled A through E, and each one contains the same amount of soil as well as exactly 1 stalk of bamboo. Jamie first measures the initial height of each bamboo stalk, then places 4 different fertilizers in pots B through E, leaving pot A without any fertilizer. Jamie places all the pots in a moist, sunlit environment and gives them the same amount of water each day for 10 days, right? And then she measures the height after the experiment, and the experiment's basically trying to see which fertilizer works the best, okay? So the control variable, this is a term that you're going to see on a lot of ACTs. The control variable is something that I, as the experimenter, control. So a control variable here, it's not going to change with each group. From group to group to group, it's going to be identical. So the length of time, 10 days, that's a control variable. The amount of sunlight, the amount of water, all those are control variables because they're the same for every single pot, okay? An experimental variable, on the other hand, is what I change up between my different trials, right? In the first pot, I put no fertilizer. In the second, I put brand A. In the third, I put brand B, etc. That's what changes with each group. A control group is different from a control variable. A control group is the group that has nothing done to it. It's as if we did nothing, right? And that's the baseline from which I'm able to compare the growth of the other plants. So our control group here is pot A, right? We didn't put anything in it. It's just a standard pot with all the other parameters going on, and we use that as a comparison. An experimental group, on the other hand, is a group that I have applied an experimental variable to. So those are all the pots with fertilizer. Oftentimes we'll call these trials in your experiments that you have on the ACT, but you can have an experimental trial, experimental group, same thing. Hypothesis, you guys should know this. This is just a statement that we guess what's going to happen before we do the experiment. It's a basic, untested idea, and then we use the experiment to test it. Empirical data, let's talk about the word empirical. Empirical just means it's something that can be tested and repeated. So if I do my experiment right, I should be able to repeat it and get the same results. Empirical data is the data that I collect after doing the particular experiment, right? This is what I collect through observation and experimentation. So there you go. Okay, let's get into physics. Distance and displacement, two different concepts. Distance is what you travel. Displacement is your straight line shortest distance from where you started and where you end up. Velocity is the measure of an object's speed and direction. Velocity is a vector quantity because it measures both a magnitude and a direction. Remember, vectors have magnitude and direction. Velocity is equal to displacement divided by time. So there you go. Equation, acceleration. Do you need to know these little equations? Very rarely they have come up as outside information, those kind of little equations. So it could be useful, it could be useless, we don't really know. Acceleration, the measure of an object's change in velocity over time. So acceleration is like speeding up, right? If you think of it that way. Acceleration also equals the change in v over the change in t, change in velocity over change in time, okay? Mass is the amount of matter an object has. Mass remains constant with changing gravities. So the mass on Earth is the same as the mass on the moon. This is really important to know. There's also this principle of the conservation of mass, which means that mass never disappears. We can never get rid of mass. Mass is always constant. Mass is different from weight. Weight is affected by gravity. So I weigh more on Earth than I would on the moon, but my mass is the same. And we can use scientific principles to calculate from a mass the weight of something, or to calculate from weight the mass of something. So if we have an experiment and something gives off a gas, that gas could have some mass to it, right? Or that steam could have some mass to it. If, for example, we boil water away. When we boil it, the steam, right, boils off and the mass of the water might seem to decrease, but the mass just turns into steam and it goes into the air. It doesn't disappear. The mass is always constant. So that's a good thing to know. Energy, let's talk about energy. These have been outside information elements on several ACTs, so it's good to know sort of all your different styles of energy. Potential energy is stored energy caused by an object's relative position. Like when you're at the top of a roller coaster, right? Your car is at the top of a hill. If you just nudge it a little bit, whoosh, it has all this energy because of where it's positioned. Kinetic energy, on the other hand, is the energy possessed by an object in motion. So when we have a roller coaster and you've gone down the hill and then you have a scoop and then it goes back up the hill, right? Right at the bottom of that scoop, we've got a lot of kinetic energy going because we have all this energy from that like downward thrust, right? So it's moving. And kinetic energy is kind of like the energy that you have because you're already moving. We can think of that as well. And mechanical energy is the energy related to position and motion, and it's basically the sum of the kinetic and the potential energy. So mechanical energy just encompasses both of those other kinds of energy. There's also conservation of energy, and that states that if I change my PE, I'm going to change my KE. So if I change my potential energy, it basically transfers into kinetic energy or vice versa, right? If that kinetic energy sends my car up the hill, then that potential energy could send it back down the hill. Forces and acceleration, I'm not going to get too far into this. You should know that friction is a force that opposes motion. So if you're moving this way, friction is the opposite direction. I have seen this in a question on a recent ACT, and I did have a student get it wrong because she didn't understand that friction would have to be in the direction that is opposite the general motion, right? Okay, thermodynamics, we've got conduction, convection, radiation, good words to generally know. You can pause this if you want to learn them. Circuits and electricity, let's talk circuit diagrams. These do come up sometimes on ACTs. Are you going to need to know how to read them? Maybe. So I'm just going to go over really fast how to read these. Horizontal lines represent a battery. So you can see here, this is a battery. The squiggly lines represent resistors, and the basic straight lines represent wires in the circuit. Current is the flow of electrons in the wire in a circuit, and the higher current means that the flow of electrons is faster. Current is measured in amps and represented by the letter I, and all this stuff usually is in the experiments when you have to go through them. But if you just know that like, oh, the double lines are always a battery and this is always a resistor, like it's just kind of like a good fun fact to know to make it easier for you to deal with these when they do come up, because they have come up on several ACTs. Another quick tip, electric charges can be positive or negative, and opposite charges attract and negative charges repel. You guys probably know that opposites attract, negatives repel. But again, good fun fact, this has been on outside information questions in the past, and I wouldn't put it past the ACT to have it come up again. Waves, basic wavelength, know that amplitude is always your half height. Wavelength is like your period. Okay, you can kind of use those interchangeably, and you should know that about waves. Frequency, you should also know, is like how many times the wavelength happens in a second or a minute or a given amount of time. If something has a higher frequency, you're going to see, right, a tighter wavelength like this. If something has a lower frequency, the wavelength is going to be wider. So that's just like a fun fact that you should know in case it comes up. Chemistry. Okay, I'm not going to get into too much of this stuff, but a few things that you do need to know. How to balance a chemical equation. So one thing that you have to know is, how do I balance this? Well, first, when you look at a chemical equation like this one, you have to multiply like this number times this number down here to figure out how many hydrogen atoms are totally being added together, right? And here, this means 2 nitrogen atoms. So then I have a ratio of 2 to 6 nitrogen to hydrogen, because 3 times 2 is going to give me 6 hydrogen atoms, and this has 2 nitrogen atoms. So that means over here, this 2 times this 3 is going to be 6 hydrogens, and this 2 times this N is going to be 2 nitrogens. So this is a balanced chemical equation. A few more vocabulary words: reagents, left side of a chemical equation; products, the right side. And then here we have a little example: molar mass, the amount of grams per mole of a molecule, good to know. Stoichiometry, another thing that you should know, and this is like what happens when we combine like 1 beaker of this concentration and another beaker of this concentration. What kind of happens? Good stuff to be familiar with. Has it come up that often? I actually haven't seen molarity that much. It's been pretty basic, but it's one of those things that you never know when it's going to come up. Again, everything in this video, like there's like a 2% chance that it's going to come up. So that's why this is kind of annoying, and why I usually say it's a great idea to cram it, because maybe one of these things will come up, and you guys can tell me in the comments if it did or not. Okay, chain reaction. This is a reaction in which the products from one step provide the reagents for the next one. This is frequently referred to in nuclear fission. But yeah, that's what a chain reaction is. I have seen the wording chain reaction in ACT questions before. So just know that that means that we do one process, and then that leads to another process, and then that might lead to another process, et cetera, et cetera. Thermodynamics. Okay, really important stuff to know. Freezing point is the temperature at which a liquid turns to solid. That should be obvious, but it's a really important thing to know. The freezing point of water is 0 degrees Celsius. You must know that. Boiling point, the temperature at which a liquid turns to a gas. The boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius. Another fun fact you really should know. Solution. Let's talk about this, because this sometimes throws people off. A solution is a mixture of any 2 substances, and it's evenly mixed and distributed, like salt water. Okay? It means something's dissolved, basically, in a solution. A solute is the substance that's dissolved into the solution, like the salt, right? A solvent is the part something dissolves into. So this is the thing that the salt is dissolving into. So in a saline solution, that would be the water. Aqueous means dissolved in water, a type of solution where the solvent is water. Cool? So a little bit about solutions. I have seen these words come up on ACTs. I have seen them throw people off. So just know those. pH. It's important to know that acid, AB, it's really easy to remember. A comes before B, right? So acids have a lower pH than bases, which have a higher pH. Okay? So acids are below 7, bases are above 7, water is 7, pure water. That's your pH scale. You should know that. It has come up on several ACTs. A neutral substance has a pH of 7 as well, and a buffer is a liquid that resists change in pH by the addition of an acid or base. Biology. Let's talk about genes. Genetics is one of the most commonly tested segments on the ACT, and you really have to know some particular terms in order to survive these passages. One thing is you have to know the difference between a genotype and a phenotype. Remember, a genotype is the specific genes responsible for creating your trait or feature. So for example, the genotype of a bird might be capital R, little r, and this means that the bird has red feathers because red feathers is a dominant trait in this cardinal. So then that could be the genotype. The phenotype would be the physical observable traits. So here that would be the red feathers that you see because he has this big R trait. And maybe if they have little r, they have pink feathers or something. Allele is the little letter. So when I did like big R, little r, the single letters are called alleles. So you have 2 alleles as part of your genes, right? Because we all have like genetic code from mom and genetic code from dad, right? We have a double helix. An organism requires 2 recessive alleles to gain a recessive trait. A recessive trait is one that is linked to recessive alleles. So for example, having blue eyes might be recessive, right? But sometimes we have a dominant trait, and then we have a dominant allele, which means, like in my example, if you have a big R, that means you have red feathers in this bird. An organism requires only 1 dominant allele to gain a dominant trait. So if a trait is dominant, you only need 1 allele to get it, but if a trait is recessive, you need 2. And we usually denote those differently with big case letters and lowercase letters. Hetero and homo. Let's talk about those roots. Hetero means different. So heterozygous means I have a genotype that is different, right? I have a big A and a little a, for example. Homozygous means I have a genotype that is 2 identical alleles. So here I have AA. I could also have capital A, capital A. Those would be homozygous. Punnett squares. This is how we do a cross. So if I have a dad that has RR and a mom that has RR, we can cross these using this Punnett square and then see what the probability is that their kids would have different patterns of genotypes. So they could have a 50% chance that they have RR, right? And a 50% chance that they have big R, little r. And that's what a Punnett square helps us figure out, okay? That's all that is. And you need to know how to run these. If this is rusty, go look it up. Sex-linked traits, that means that they're linked to either of the sex chromosomes. The most common ones are linked to the X chromosome. And what that means is if they're a sex-linked trait, then males are generally more likely to have this trait than females, because if it's recessive, then the male will always show that recessive trait if it's on the X chromosome. But a woman with two X chromosomes, because women have two X chromosomes, men have one X and one Y, tip, the woman is probably going to be more likely to not have two copies of the recessive gene. So like colorblindness, for example, is a sex-linked trait. That's why males are more likely to inherit colorblindness, because it's recessive and it's carried on the X chromosome. There are other conditions that are that way as well. Just because a trait is sex-linked doesn't mean it has to be recessive. You could also have a sex-linked trait that was dominant. Heads up. For the record, karyotype is a picture that shows like all your chromosomes. So it shows like all 23 chromosomes like lined up like in a little picture. Cool. Chromatid is basically half of a chromosome. It's the strand. So if we have like the squiggly little thing where you have like the little, you know, X, right? It's the like 1/2 of the X. That's the chromatid. A chromosome is the thing that carries DNA. It contains two chromatids bound together by an X shape, and we have 23 chromosomes in the human system, 23andMe. You can remember that. If you want to remember, there's 23 of them. Gametes are reproductive cells. So egg and sperm, for example, are gametes. It's just a good fact to know. Nucleic acids are RNA and DNA. DNA carries genetic code, and you need to know that outside information. It's come up on the ACT before. RNA is used to copy genetic code, but it's also a nucleic acid. Good thing to know. Cellular biology. This is just a bunch of definitions. Photosynthesis was on a test as outside information. I would thus assume that something like cellular respiration could be too, or osmosis, or meiosis, or mitosis, or cytoplasm. All these kind of basic things. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It creates energy. These are all kind of basic terms that are in line with the kind of things that the ACT has tested before. So if you want to learn them, pause this video, or like I said, check out the blog that goes with this video. We will link to it in the description below this post, so go check that out. And there you go. Endotherm warm-blooded, ectotherm cold-blooded, vertebrates, invertebrates, you should know those. And taxonomic ranks, like the planets, this is another like fun thing that you had to memorize, probably in bio class, if you ever had it. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Good to know. You might need it on an ACT someday. I bet you will, but I don't know which ACT. 5% chance it's your ACT. Binomial nomenclature. That's the way that we name animals, is genus, species. Like Homo sapiens. Homo is our genus, sapiens is our species. So good to know. Some other terms here: natural selection, good to know. Symbiotic, good to know. Commensalism, mutualism, parasitism, predatory, decomposers. All good basic terms to know. Do I know what's going to be on your ACT? I don't. But if you take the test and you're like, Brooke, you were super right, feel free to post below this video as long as you're not breaking any rules from ACT or your test has been released. And I hope you like this. If so, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, because we have lots more awesome stuff, not just on the ACT, but on college admissions in general, on life, on career finding, on everything you might need to know if you're a junior or senior in high school or pursuing college and beyond. So subscribe, like this video, watch more videos. Good luck on your ACT, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.